Welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, the podcast for the leaders and entrepreneurs of today.
Way to go, guys. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul, I see you. All right, Charlie. Finish on. Let's go.
Hey there, it's Coach Cole here, and welcome to episode 302 of the Today's Leader podcast. Today, I'm taking a bit of a break from our interviews. We've got some amazing guests and experts coming up in the coming weeks. But as you know, we had our 300th episode the other day. And, unfortunately, the team just hasn't got the editing for the expert that we wanted to share today. So what I'm doing instead is I'm just going to share a very quick observational analysis from my own leadership experience, but also from some recent third-party observations. So people that I have in my network, people that I coach, people that I work with. So, and next week, you will see us continue with some more amazing guests and interviews. And as I said, our team are working on those episodes as we speak. But I really want to share the concept of accepted practices. And it's one that many people are impacted by, but it's one that doesn't get a lot of airplay, I guess, in and around the leadership world, because the concept of accepted practices. So an accepted practice is something that, I suppose in some ways it's self-explanatory. It's become accepted. And what can happen with an accepted practice, especially if the accepted practice is below the standards that are required, below or at odds sometimes with the behavioral or the values-based behaviors that you want to see within your organization. And often what we'll see is those accepted practices have really only come about because of the fact that leaders haven't dealt with them. So if you think of the quote, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, that's what we're talking about when we talk about accepted practices. So, taking when we ignore a standard, the standard you ignore, the standard you attempt to ignore, is ultimately the standard that you accept. So if you take that quote, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, and you take it forward, you then start thinking about the standard that you ignore, or the standard that you're attempting to ignore is ultimately the standard that you accept. And once you accept a standard, it becomes the standard. So that's really, really important to understand. Once you accept a standard, it becomes the standard. And this is where we start to see the pain and the poor performance really starting to etch in, because when you're accepting standards that are below the desired standards, that's when pain from a leadership perspective and poor performance from a business perspective really start to kick in. Now, Kerry Patterson in Crucial Conversations states that often leaders avoid those challenging conversations. In fact, they say that there's three potential outcomes to any of those crucial conversations. One is we avoid them. Number two is we handle them poorly, or number three is we handle them well. So, and I'd suggest that instead of a 1 in 3 chance of doing it properly, the odds are a lot less, to be honest, because from what we also know is that most leaders, and I know this is going to be a very generalization, and the research that I'm going to quote talked about research in and around surveying 1,000 leaders, but most leaders avoid tough, challenging, or crucial conversations. And I know that potentially there's a number of leaders that are listening to this and saying, well, that's not me. The research would indicate that potentially there are still those tough, challenging conversations that you are avoiding. It's a big call, I know, but it's supported by research. And VitalSmarts is the company that's done this research. And when they've interviewed, leaders or done this research in relation to 1,000 leaders, 78% of them talked about avoiding conversations and complaining and whinging to others about the avoided conversation. So 78%. So when I say most leaders, Most leaders is based around some actual research. It's also interesting that 66% of leaders in that same survey just did the extra work themselves. So instead of challenging someone to step up and hit the standards that were required, they just said, oh, it's just easier for me to do it. And often we see that with leaders. It's just they don't see the benefits of taking the time to develop or to challenge their team. And what they see is that they just do the work themselves. It's easier, it's quicker. But also what tends to happen is that they continue. It just puts them in this environment where they're going to continue to do the work themselves. 53% of leaders in that same survey ruminated about the decisions and 50% got angry. So when I say most leaders avoid conversations, it's actually backed up by some research. And the question is, why do we avoid it? And often it's because we're not equipped to handle it. We haven't got the skills or the expertise. We haven't been trained. We haven't been taught. Number two is that often we're just not confident, and often that will come back to the fact that we don't have the capabilities. We may shy away from conflict, so we're overlooking behaviours and standards because of that. We're fearful of conflict. We're not wanting to embrace conflict. And once again, here's a bit of rocket news. Most people don't like conflict, but the reality is that there's a process and there's a system and there's a way that you can deal with conflict. Now, maybe it's because the person delivers in certain areas, and we often see this in sales teams. You might have a high-flying salesperson that's hitting their KPIs consistently or exceeding their KPIs, and because of that, they are often, given some allowances or some leeway, I guess, in relation to the way that they interact with others. And often what you see is the rest of the sales team really dragging the chain because of those cultural issues. And so a leader makes the decision, I'm going to stick with my high performer. And ultimately what can happen is that you end up with a sales team that's so out of whack, it's not funny. So it's important to be understanding the behaviours and the standards that you actually want to achieve within that team dynamic world. So if you've got one outstanding salesperson, that's not where you want to be. You want a team of outstanding salespeople. And often that means you've got to let go of your high flyer because they're just not gelling, or they're not team players, or there's a multitude of reasons. But the main reason is that we just usually avoid the potential of conflict. So we'll walk past it, or we'll accept a standard that's less than the desired standard. And guess what? It becomes the new standard. And when we try and enforce the desired standards with other members of your team, they see that you're not enforcing the standard with the problem child, whatever that looks like within your team. And that breeds a real disconnect between the desired culture and the actual culture. So you've got people that are disconnected. They're seeing double standards. They're seeing hypocrisy. And as a leader, that's never good. So what we end up with is the concept of accepted practices. We just accept people's behaviour. So accepted practices may include behaviours that impact on the team, like emotional outbursts, walking on eggshells, not wanting to say the wrong thing, a silence, as in like very deliberate silence. Ignoring people, disobeying directives, being selective in their work output, missing deadlines, poor quality work, poor teamwork, and they're just a few. So they become accepted practices, and people say, well, that's just Bill, or that's just Mary, or that's just who they are. Well, no, if they're not meeting that team dynamic, that team culture, that team behaviour that you desire, it should be addressed. Often accepting practices continue on unabated, and we have this sense on the surface. From a leadership perspective, we've got this surface sense that everything's well, because we're comfortable, because we're not dealing with the discomfort of having to bring someone up to standard. But ultimately, deeper down, we've got the mistrust and we've got underperformance. So it's very rare that you've got a team that's performing above the desired standards, where you've got accepted standards within that team that are lower than the desired standards. It just doesn't take rocket science to actually acknowledge that. And often we'll give ourselves excuses for not dealing with it. And, we'll often tell ourselves we just don't have time. It's that happened 2 days ago. It's far too late for me to be talking about it now. Maybe we'll convince ourselves that it's only a small thing, but often it's because they're a good friend. And, I can keep giving you excuses because we keep giving ourselves excuses as to why we should not be dealing with that, the standard that's being missed. So often the mess the results from our lack of leadership is left to others to clean up. And this is what I tend to see with organizations or larger corporates. People take on a team and suddenly realize that Joe Blow, who they thought was a really good bloke, is now one of the problem child because he just doesn't do anything. He's very selective in what he does with the work, very missed deadlines, just doesn't communicate, all of these things. So the mess is often left for others to clean up. And it's interesting because many leaders will often believe within themselves that they've found a way of working with their problem children within the team. And that they've got this sense of an uneasy truce, which provides some level of performance, but clarity around this is, when you get really clear around this, it's very clear that you're not reaching your best performance. You're not reaching your best outcomes. With uneasy truces, avoided conversations and accepted practices, you are just not hitting the mark or what the mark could be. So you're leaving performance at the door, and right beside where you've left your team culture is what you're effectively doing by those uneasy truces, avoided conversations, and accepted practices. And as I said, the mess is often left for others to clean up. And really, there's the challenge that we have is that we just need to deal with them, and we need to deal with them in a timely manner. We need to be effective, and we need to be confident that we're going to be able to deal with them and raise the standards to what we desire. And so, if I was to give you an 8-step process, it would look something like this, right? So you need to know the standards. You need to really understand, comprehend the standards that you want. This is the standards of professionalism within your team. It's a standard of behaviors. It's a standard of KPIs or sales. Or you need to be really aware of what they are. They can't be ambiguous. You just need to have that clarity around the standards. And then you need to commit to them. So number 2 is to commit to the standards that you want. So number 3, understand the impact that non-adherence to the standards will mean. And not just to yourself, not just to your results, but to the team culture. So if you want a team that's all gelling behind the standards and really committed to doing the best that they can be doing for the organization, you need to understand the impact, the negative impact that non-adherence will have. You need to invest in the most important part of your role. This is step number 4, and that's your people. And as a leader, you need to have the ability or the confidence or the desire and the attitude to coach them to hit the desired standard. So it's not about whacking people over a stick. It's about, whacking them with a stick over your head, around their head. It really is about coaching them to hit the desired standards. And I'm trying to understand deeply what's the real reason behind maybe the poor performance that they've got. As a leader, number 5, aim for that concept of respect. Aim for the team to respect you. You do not want to be liked by, and you cannot be liked by everyone. And as a leader, that should never be your aim. Your aim should be for respect, and people should respect you for who you are and the standards that you drive. Number 6 is lead by example and deal with drops in standards in a timely and effective way. If the standard you walk past is now the standard you accept. So this is part of the process of being a leader, being able to deal with things effectively. Number 7, don't turn a blind eye, and that means we often turn a blind eye to so many things, don't we? So don't turn a blind eye. Be very, very conscious of what you're seeing and what you're being perceived as seeing and accepting. So that's also one of the challenges that we face. So don't turn a blind eye just because someone's a good bloke, just because a lady may be a star performer, just because doesn't mean we turn a blind eye and we give them allowances in other areas, especially in the behavioural sense. The behavioural sense is one of the key areas for team dynamics. We need a team that understand the values and the behaviours that they have within themselves, within the team. And number 8, the earlier you can address any drop in standards or any potential conflict, the more effective you will be in resolving and fixing and making sure it's a sustainable fix. The longer you leave it, the less likely that becomes. So the earlier you can address it, the more effective you will be in getting a sustainable solution. The longer you leave it, the less likely. Now, I know that's a little Captain Obvious, but believe it or not, it gets missed by so many people. We say, oh, they're just having a bad day, or we're fantastic at making excuses, but the reality is we need to be more aware of how we can address it and how we can deal with it in a timely manner. Accepted practices hurt. They hurt leaders. Don't inflict your own pain. And often we inflict our own pain longer term because we're avoiding the initial discomfort that we get when we're addressing tough conversations. So if we understand that initial discomfort is like that conflict curve, the sooner we can get that initial discomfort dealt with from ourselves and have the confidence to deal with these conversations, the sooner it is that you can deal with those drops in standards or potential conflict, the earlier you can do it. So don't inflict your own pain through avoiding discomfort that comes with addressing those tough conversations, because I can tell you the longer term pain will severely be a multiplier of that discomfort that you may feel by having the conversation. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I hope you've taken some real value out of my conversation with you today. The accepting of accepted practices really does bring nothing more than just pain and poor performance. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget our expert interview series recommences as from next week. I hope that you can tune in. I hope you can subscribe. If you found some value in any of our podcasts, please do a review and share it with other people so that we can be found. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we shall see you all again next time. Bye for now.